Hello again, everybody. So it's finally time to do the Melting Remnant card review. I have not been looking forward to this one. Melting Remnant is going to be terrible to talk about. People have some really spicy opinions about Remnant. I don't think they're that good. They suffer from a lot of the same problems that Umbra suffers from. They have poor consistency, and they need to use a lot of gimmicky mechanics just to get the same results that the more generic factions, aka Hellhorn, Stygian, and Awoken, can achieve with just bog standard stuff. We have to jump through hoops to really make progress with it. So let's get into the logbook, and as always, we're going to start by looking at our champion here, Mr. Rector Flicker, and I think that the Rector is probably one of the most imbalanced heroes or champions in the game. And that's because Burn Bright on Covenant 25 is so much better than the other two that you want to go for this every time, and you want to put all your points into Burn Bright if you can. I've had very little success with Accumulator or Dark Calling on Covenant 25. I can see the game plan with them, but they just don't solve any of the major problems that you're going to run into. Whereas Burn Bright Rector over here solves a lot of issues. He's very good at dealing damage and very good at doing damage, and yeah, that's really all he does. He's just a really big, really buff dude who's going to be taking huge chunks out frontline units, and he can do a number on bosses too, especially if we use some strategies that I'll talk about when we get into the card pool. But yeah, Burn Bright is so much better than Accumulator or Dark Calling that it's not even fair. Like, personally, I think this right here is the main reason you're going to be playing Melting Remnant. Like, this is their saving grace. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Burn Bright Rector right now because he cares a lot about the cards that we're going to be going over in a little bit. However, Accumulator, Rector Flicker, basically the problem is that we have this huge buff tanky unit, but you have to be putting him on the kill floor, but he does no damage, and that's a problem because well, you'll see why it's a problem when we look at the backline stuff that Melting Remnant has access to. But this is a problem because it just doesn't do enough damage. Whereas something like Explosive Sentient, or just the Sentient in general, either her Explosive or Thorns forms, Explosive does really good damage to frontline units, and Thorns does good AoE damage. This does neither of those things. This, it's just a big beefy boy. Yeah, I'm sure it's real good at killing bosses, but I don't think bosses are your biggest concern as Remnant a lot of the time. It seems like whenever I play Remnant, there's just something that the deck's no good at. Either my AoE is terrible, my single target burst is terrible, or I can't kill bosses because I got a bad draw. This addresses one of those problems, being the boss problem, but it does nothing for your AoE, it does nothing for your single targets, so your Gilded Wings and your Pyro Wings and all this stuff is just going to barrel right past, and your champion's not going to do anything to stop those. So, anyway, this does have some light synergy with Umbra, but I highly discourage pairing Umbra and Melting because it's really unfortunate, actually. I think the only clan that Melting has any real synergy with is Umbra. But if that's what we're doing, then we're putting the two most inconsistent clans in the game together just for some light synergy, but the package as a whole is just even more inconsistent than if you were just running one of the clans, because now you have no clan to fall back on because everything you're trying to do is inconsistent. Uh, this one I would stay away from it. It just doesn't address the problems that you're going to be having. Like, sure, it can help a lot with bosses, but most of the time, bosses are not going to be your biggest problem as melting rooms. They have plenty of better ways to deal with bosses than this. You need single target damage, or AoE at the very least. This does not do either of those things. And then we got Dark Calling. Uh, this one kind of suffers from consistency issues is the big thing. There's a few problems with this. First off, the stats are just no bueno. We got pretty terrible base stats at level 3. At level 1, he's 10-10. That's terrible. Then he goes to 20-20 and 40-40, except by the time you're getting Form 3, the 40-40 stat line just ain't cutting it anymore. Like, you need beefier dudes. And the big problem with this is that you want to be setting this dude up on the bottom floor so his resolve can trigger at the end of the turn after stuff has died, so that you can get stuff that has died on higher floors or even the same floor back on the same turn. So you want to be sticking him on the bottom, but sticking him on the bottom is a huge pain because his base stats are terrible, so he's very likely to get bursted down by God knows what unless you luck out and draw some split in front of him on that same turn. But if you're running, just what am I trying to say? If you're running really just baseline beefy boys that you're looking to keep alive for the whole fight in your Dark Calling Rector Flicker deck, it doesn't work because they don't synergize with him. So you're probably trying to use some gimmick strategy to tank for the Rector on the bottom line, but that's unreliable. And if something happens to Rector, well, guess what? You probably haven't been picking other Reform cards up until this point because you took the Rector, so more Reform doesn't do a ton for you. So it suffers from major consistency problems. And generally, the random aspect of it is also kind of a turnoff. Sometimes you'll just get terrible luck with Dark Calling, and that's on top of the other inconsistency issues you get just for playing Remnant. So you're adding even more inconsistency on top of it, and it's just a terrible package. I know, yeah, you can win with these on Covenant 25. You can, but this this is just so much better. Like, this just puts these two dudes to shame. Anyway, let's get into the cards. So, order by first. Alright. First up, we got the Dreg. This is your starter card. It's a token unit. It's a 0 mana 9/3 with burnout to it. It takes up 1 space. So, the Dregs are kind of the. I think they're the most defining thing about Melting Remnant. Whenever I pick Melting Remnant, the first thing that comes to mind is the Dregs. Because the Dregs just feel like such a huge deal in a Melting Remnant deck, and if you don't know how to utilize the Dregs properly, or you can't utilize the Dregs well, you're gonna have a terrible time. I think that these guys, their base stats are kind of terrible. but they don't cost anything and they only take up one capacity. So you can stick them into little cracks. You can use them kinda like you would use morsels to tank damage in the front line, just tank a hit. You can use them like that, and that's okay. You can stick them in the back of some dudes where there's free space for a little bit of damage. You can do all kinds of stuff with these guys. But there's a little bit of a problem with them. That problem is that having these as a starting unit in your deck is on top of your train stores and your champion means you're going to have serious space problems for the entire run, pretty much. I don't think I've ever had a single melting remnant run where space wasn't a problem. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Melting Remnant in general has pretty low mana costs, so usually you're going to be wanting to take either card draw or capacity as your boss reward. So that's kind of helping there. But yeah, the dregs, they're very important. You can use them to tank a little bit of damage. You can use them to do a little bit of damage. You can use them as fodder for some stuff. But we'll get into that stuff later. I'm not going to talk too much more about the drag because there's a ton of cards here and a lot of them do really weird crap. So this is probably going to be a long video already, so I'm just going to move on from the drag. I don't have much else to say about him. You start with him, so yeah. Next up, we got Hollow Drippings. It's 0 cost, it consumes, it applies Burnout 3 to friendly Burnout units on the floor. So this is the first of many common cards we're going to be looking at that contribute massively towards the consistency issues that plague Melting Remnant. So, Hollow Drippings. What does this card represent? This represents a way to keep your burnout dudes alive in the early stages of a run before you have a more refined strategy for doing so. So, what's the problem with it? Well, sometimes you just draw it at the absolute worst time, and then everything goes to shit. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've started a new run, and you get this as your common card on Melting Remnant. Cool, right? And then we get Burnout, Rector Flicker. Awesome. So our game plan is that we're going to pop the Rector Flicker down on turn 1, and then we're gonna draw Hollow Drippings in time to keep the Rector Flicker from burning out, right? It's a fair game plan. It should work, right? Well, guess what? Sometimes you just get screwed. Sometimes you'll have like both Hollow Drippings on the bottom of the deck, and then your Rector Flicker dies, and then you take a bunch of damage, and it's all uphill from there. And sometimes you just straight up die on the first stage when that happens. Uh, and I mean, unless you were like redoing the run, there was no way you could have known that was going to happen. Yeah, you knew there was a chance it could happen, but it's the kind of thing where you just have to take that risk. I think Melting Remnant is the only clan where even that early in the run, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, I can get my plan going fine and everything just goes smooth, or I can just brick my draw completely and end up losing in stage 1 or 2, and that just feels terrible. But yeah, this is usually a card you're gonna start with a lot of time. It's a 1 in 8 chance you get this as your starting common, and it mostly just exists to keep Rector Flicker alive in the early game. If you're using this for other purposes, I highly discourage that. Most other burnout units aren't worth extending the burnout timer on. through cards like this. There are better ways to do it if you're looking to do that, or alternatively, you can use reform strategies for those guys, which tend to work out a little bit better, but we'll get to those later. Next up, we got Purifying Cleanse, which suffers from all the same problems as Hollow Drippings. Sometimes you just don't draw the card when you need it, and sometimes you draw the card when you don't need it at all. Like, I forgot to mention with the Hollow Dripping, sometimes don't try to use this on units other than the Rector in general. Like, it may seem like a good idea, but trust me, it's even more likely to screw you, because then you can draw it too early, you can draw it too late, sometimes it doesn't show up at the right time, or just all sorts of stuff can go wrong. But if you have, here's the other problem with these cards. You need just enough burnout extension. If you're going to be doing this, you need just enough burnout extension in the deck to keep your units alive through the fight. But anything over that is completely wasted. It does nothing for you. Extending the burnout timer past the duration that the unit will have stayed alive anyway is completely worthless. And that's the problem. So naturally, it might seem like a good idea that you want to stick more of this kind of stuff in your deck just to increase your consistency, to make sure that you're going to be able to keep your dudes alive and not break your draw as often. But when you do that, guess what? You're still breaking your draw, because now you're drawing all these do nothing cards. Like, you're drawing your second Hollow Drippings, your second Whiplash or whatever, but your dudes are already fine on their burnout timer, so these cards are doing literally nothing. So either way, you're screwed. Either way, you're gonna break draws. There's no way to get around it. And that's the problem with these burnout extension cards like this. Anyway, Purifying Cleanse. I've talked enough about burnout extension here. I'm just gonna say the 10 health. This is mostly gonna be applied to Lady the Reformed. I think that Rector Flicker himself is tanky enough that the 10 health doesn't matter a lot of time. And the times that it does matter, 10 health just isn't going to cut it. Card cost 0. Unlike Hollow Drippings, this doesn't consume, so it's going to be stuck in your deck for the whole fight. Which is actually a downside, in my opinion, because unlike Hollow Drippings, where you can just play the card once, apply the burnout, and then the card's out of your deck, and you don't have to draw it again when the burnout's already been applied and you just don't need more burnout. Purifying Cleanse, it stays in your deck for the whole fight, and you just keep drawing it again and again. But then when you need it, it's nowhere to be found. So yeah, I do think Hollow Drippings is better than Purifying Cleanse or Whiplash because it consumes. So we can stick like just enough Hollow Drippings in the deck to get us through the fight and not have to worry about overdrawing them. But we still suffer from consistency problems. But the Purifying Cleanse and Whiplash, you can just overdraw these to hell, and you have to stick even more of them in the deck than the Hollow Drippings because they don't apply as much burnout. So yeah, Hollow Drippings is way better than Purifying Cleanse or Whiplash. I'm just going to go over Whiplash right now because it kind of suffers from the same problems as Purifying Cleanse, except it costs 1, which isn't as big of a deal because you're going to have a little bit of leftover mana sometimes on Melting Remnant, but the effect itself is kind of crap. 1 mana for +5 attack and burnout 2. You're not going to want to stick this on your non-burnout units, so you are just sticking this on your burnout guys. Most burnout guys don't have multi-strike unless you put multi-strike on them. Besides the draft, which we'll get to in a second, other than him, most of your burnout guys, you're not going to be sticking multi-strike on them. So let's get to the draft. The draft, it's a 1 cost, it's burnout 1, 10 attack, multi-strike 1, and 5 health. Usually, it's a token unit, by the way, and found that this one is kind of strange because it's essentially just a bigger, beefier drag, but it has less burnout and it has the multi-strike. The multi-strike is really important because it means that any damage buffs that go in the draft are going to help you considerably. So, when do we take draft? We take draft either when we have. I think you want to take draft almost exclusively in reform strategies, which we'll get to in a bit. And the reason for this is because those inherently provide you with extra attack, which is really good with the multi-strike. It's probably a good idea to stick a Wick Stone on these guys to give them just a little bit of extra burnout time to start with, because burnout 1 is a little bit miserable, to be honest. And I will admit there are some strategies with Reform where burnout 1 is desirable as opposed to 2, but most of the time I would rather just have the unit have burnout 2 so it can stick around for a little bit longer, more consistently. The draft's alright. I've had some success with it. I know that there's some good stuff you can do with it, but I haven't really played with it a ton. The card just doesn't interest me a whole lot. It's okay. It will help with backline damage. It is only one capacity, and it does have a lot of attack considering that space, so that's probably the biggest selling point here, as opposed to something like a Edge Prior or... Wait, am I really comparing this to Morsel Master? No, this is nowhere near as good as Morsel Master. Well, it does more damage than Morsel Master, so it's better in that department. But yeah, for one capacity, this is a lot of damage, and that's the big selling point here. It's very capacity efficient. So the big problem you're going to have to deal with is finding ways to get around the burnout 1. Either through hollow drippings or some units we'll talk about later, or reform stuff, etc., etc. Next up we got Entombed Explosive. This one is a tomb, so it does benefit from Melting Pot, but the Melting Pot doesn't make a ton of sense. I feel like it's the one that gives them like plus 30 something HP. I think it's 35 HP. I'm not 100% sure, but that one I feel like is trying to make us use these as primary frontliners, but why? There are way better tanking strategies you could be using just with Remnant, and that's not even going into clans you could be pairing them with. Anyway, Entombed Explosive, it's kinda like a morsel, except it's doing a lot of damage. It's basically it. You're just using it to tank a hit for one of your dudes, and it's doing a bunch of damage to the friend dude. It does pair pretty nicely with the Waxer Snuffer, which doubles the Extinguish effect. And I think it is a pretty powerful card in the early game. Unfortunately, it does fall off quite a bit in the late game. I don't think this is a card that you want to be reforming a ton. There are way better things to be reforming than this because it doesn't really scale well with stats. It's just kind of base damage, base damage, base damage. And that's great in the early game, but in the late game that falls off pretty hard. So a lot of times you'll start with this in the deck and it'll be pretty alright. But don't count on it doing much of anything in the late game, because it just won't. Also a token unit, by the way. Next up, we got Molded. I think that Molded is probably one of the best cards that Remnant has access to, for a few reasons. Firstly, this helps cut out... It's kind of like an oh shit switch. Like, something happens to a really important dude, and you can use Molded to get him back for a little bit while you try to stabilize, or you can use Molded on your burnout dudes, and that's the generic intended way to use it. You can use it on your Extinguish guys, which is pretty alright, because it has burnout 1 to them. I think the most interesting thing you can do with this is specifically with Burn Bright Rector. You can use this to have the Burn Bright Rector or similar units essentially follow the boss up the train so they can fight the boss on every floor, and It's a very good boss killing strategy. This one is actually good enough that a lot of time I put holdover on it because having the ability to do this every turn just helps a ton with consistency, and it helps a ton with utility too because it makes sure that any weird blowout stuff that happens isn't as detrimental because you always just have the option of getting your units back. And that's very nice. And that's probably one of Melting Remnant's strong points. They're more resilient to major blowouts. Like, if something happens to one of my major units when I'm playing, I don't know, Hellhorn Awoken, then I'm just shit out of luck. Because how am I going to get it back? It's gone for the rest of the fight. Melting Remnant, however, units, you can get them back. This is one of the best ways to do it. Next up, we got Molten Encasement. Uh, this one's kind of a tanking strategy, but it's a mediocre tanking strategy. It doesn't really help with bosses a ton. It doesn't help your damage at all. Unlike the Entombed Explosive, it does keep your backline safe from all sorts of shenanigans. It keeps your tanky dudes tankier, but you also have less capacity on that floor, and it's only for turns, so you gotta either find other ways to apply stealth on top of this to make it more feasible, or you need to find a way to get this back over and over, aka reform, aka molded. You can do it with the reform rector flicker as well. Overall, not a big fan of this card. I think that the the other stealth card, there's only one, actually, not counting Bounty Stalker, there's only one other stealth card in the game, and the other one is just miles better than this. So yeah, this is okay for keeping your units alive in the early game, but it's not terribly efficient. It has some major issues. Next up, we got Wicklash. I already talked about Wicklash, I'm not going to talk about it again. And now we got Drip Fall. So Drip Fall, 2 mana descend a unit. This card is an insult. I am offended by this card. Why do we have to pay 2 mana to descend a unit on a Melting Remnant when we could play Hellhorn and we could play 1 mana to ascend a unit? Like, what? That's not fair. What? That's not fair at all. Descending units is way worse than ascending them. And the fact that it's more expensive, it just makes it even worse. The reason that descending is worse than ascending is because when you're ascending stuff, you have a bit more time to set up. But when you're descending stuff, you have to set your stuff up on the bottom floor immediately and then descend it down. Whereas with Ascension, I can set my stuff up on the top floor so I don't have to worry about it getting bombarded by all sorts of crap early on in the fight. I don't want to set up on the bottom floor. The bottom floor is just too dangerous. It's insanely dangerous. And the 2 mana. Oh, the 2 mana. I feel like if this were just 1 mana, the card would still be fine. It would still be a really solid card. But at 2 mana, it just doesn't. It's just not good enough. It just doesn't do enough. Sure, you can use this for all the same stuff you could use in Passage for, in theory, but let's say there's a steel wing on the bottom floor. What are you gonna do? Descend it? That doesn't work. Whereas with Ascend, you can just send him up and then he's not a problem anymore. I think the reason Descend is more expensive than Ascend is because I guess we're supposed to use it on enemies, but that just doesn't do anything because usually I'm just barely scraping by with the stuff like the Gilded Wings, which are going to be the only major enemies that I'm interested in really, really doing more damage to in the late game, is the Gilded Wings. If I try to descend the Gilded Wings, they're just going to go behind two other Gilded Wings that I have to deal with as well, and that doesn't fix anything. Now I'm just back to square one. Like, now I've just relegated the problem to one floor, and that's not fixing anything. The problem's still there. Whereas with Hidden Passage, early on in the fight, I can ascend a Gilded Wing ahead of time to get more damage off of my units on a higher floor on a turn where they wouldn't have attacked otherwise. This card, I've tried it so many times. I've tried so hard to make it work, and every single time it's just disappointment, disappointment, disappointment. I, like, I feel like the Siren needs to be 1 mana, or it just needs another effect here, because this does not cut it. It's just not good enough. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's move on to the uncommon. First up, we got Intent on Death. There's some cheeky stuff you can do with this. You can use this on the various extinguished dudes, like the aforementioned Doomed Explosive or Mold Encasement. That's okay. Unfortunately, Intent on Death suffers from the issue of being useful solely in 2-card combos. There's also the thing you can do with the collectors where you use this to get extra gold off them. But I don't want to talk about extra gold on Remnant yet. We'll get there when we get there. I think I'm going to have a lot to say about extra gold on Remnant. It's going to get spicy. So Intent on Death, I don't think the card's very good. It suffers from the problem of only being good in 2-card combos, and even in those 2-card combos, it doesn't do a ton. I think what people are mostly using this for is to get more stacks on their Bounty Stalker. We'll get to Bounty Stalker when we get there, but that doesn't... it's alright, it's a solid scaling strategy, but then we have this card that just doesn't do anything by itself. That's the big problem with Intent on Death. There's literally nothing by itself. You have to combo it with something else. And sometimes you just won't get that something else. Sometimes you'll start the run, and this will be your rare card, and you just won't have any extinguished guys. So you're just out of luck. So you got this brick in your deck, and then you got the freaking Purifying Cleanse in the deck, so you pick the Burn Bright Rector, but the Purifying Cleanses are at the bottom of the deck because you were busy drawing this brick, and now you're boned. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit off topic. Anyway, this card's not very good. You can do some cute combos with it, but those combos are overall just too inconsistent. Back to consistency issues. The faction's already just a mess when it comes to consistency. So why would I want a card that does nothing by itself? I want cards to help me that are gonna do useful things by themselves, not this. This is just no more. So next up we got Memories of the Melted. I don't know. I don't know about this card. It is a mana card that we have on the least mana intensive faction in the game. Back to the dregs. Dregs cost 0. You know what that means? From floor 1, your average mana cost in deck is going to be way lower than it would be with any other factions, just by default. And it's by a huge amount, too. So we got Memories of the Melted. Usually, I almost never pick this card. Usually when I play with it, it's because it got stuck into my deck at the start. And whenever that happens, every single time it's just another brick. I never find anything useful to do with it. I think the most useful thing I've done with it is just using it to trigger incants, but that's not something to be proud of. You can do some interesting things with this in like an Awoken Rail Spike or a Stygian Rail Spike for killing bosses or whatever, or a Umbra or a Shroud Rail Spike. That's alright. It's probably best with Umbra because you can use it to generate a ton of mana there. Maybe you can use this to get a Shadow Siege out. Maybe you can't. Maybe you use this on an X cost card, but Melting Remnant has no good X cost cards. We'll get to that later. So I don't know why this card is here. It doesn't help the Melting Remnant game plan at all. You're only looking to combo this with cards from other clans, and at that point, now we have a card that, like Intent on Death, is only good in 2-card combos. However, now those 2-card combos are only consisting of cards from other clans entirely. Like, what? I don't like this card. I also, if it's not clear at this point, I have some serious problems with this faction. Okay, anyway, next up we got Sacred Wicks. Oh god. At least after this we have a good card. That's nice. We have a few good cards after this actually, so that'll be a nice break. So Sacred Wicks. 0 mana, it consumes and you reform 2 random units. I kind of talked about this already with the Reform Rector Flicker. Reforming random dudes. I mean, reforming dudes for 0 is always cool, but there's some issues with this. Namely, you're reforming random dudes. So, back to the consistency issues again. What's going to happen a lot of time is you're either going to draw this too early before the stuff you want to be reforming has died. So then you have to cycle all the way back through the deck, and you might not even draw it again. So that's great. Or you draw it too late after other stuff has died, and then you reform the wrong units. So that's great. And then sometimes, if the stars align, you'll get exactly what you need from the Sacred Wicks. But I wouldn't count on it. Use Molded instead. This card is just way too high rolly, and it kind of serves. It's feeding into this greater problem of cards that are just useless by themselves, only good in 2-card combos, or they're just RNG based, or they're no good if you draw them at the wrong time. You need to draw them at exactly the right turn. And this one right here, Sacred Wicks, is just feeding into that problem further. Let's move on to Crushing Demise. So Crushing Demise is definitely one of the best Melting Remnant cards. However, it once again suffers from consistency issues. It says random on the card. Usually what you're going to be wanting to do with this is using it on a floor where you have no dudes set up to attempt to kill a big dude that the enemy has set up. And usually that's going to be like a Gilded Wing. So what's the game plan? Well, when you use Crushing Demise, guess what? You're setting up on the middle floor. You know why? You can't set up on top floor, because that's going to be where you're killing Gilded Wings with this Crushing Demise after you've cleared out all the backline trash. And then you can't set up on the bottom floor because setting up on the bottom floor is suicide. So you're setting up on the middle floor, you're running this Crushing Demise. You can try to high roll with it on the bottom floor. Sometimes you'll get lucky, but sometimes you'll just get screwed and kill like a Gilded Wing or something. But Lizardmen, what if we use AoE to kill the freaking backliners before we play the Crushing Demise on the bottom floor? Well, guess what? Remnant only has one good AoE card, which we'll get to later. And Remnant as a whole has terrible AoE. So that's not great. But yeah, this is definitely one of the better cards. You're going to want to be using this on the top floor to kill big tanky guys that have leaked through up to there after you've cleared out the backline trash. Don't try using this before you've cleared the backline trash. It's just going to whiff too often to be worth it. Next up, we got Engulfed in Smoke. No, actually, obviously, sometimes you're going to be forced to do that, but it's best to try to avoid that. So anyway, Engulfed in Smoke. This is another good Melting Remnant card. It is, thank God, a card that does not suffer from consistency problems. So you apply Stealth Tooth friendly units on the floor. This means that they cannot be attacked no matter what, except by freaking Daedalus's bombs go right through stealth, and I wish they didn't. That screwed me so many times. But yeah, this doesn't block damage from the bombs that Daedalus spawns. So anyway, Engulfed in Smoke, this is the kind of card you want to either A, put Holdover on and use this as a primary tanking strat, then you're using this as pretty much your sole way of mitigating damage and forgoing any sort of tanky units entirely. That's okay. In fact, it's pretty good. It's probably your best tanking strategy and probably one of the more consistent ways you're going to be able to kill bosses as Melting Remnant. But as I said before, Melting Remnant has a lot of good ways to kill bosses, so that's not saying a ton. Or alternatively, you can put a Permafrost on it, and that's going to let you use it as a utility card to do stuff like protect your backline units from sweepers or stop yourself from getting ember drained by the damn pyro wings, or all sorts of stuff. It's going to help with all sorts of stuff. And that's great. That's really great. The fact that this card is flexible like that helps a ton. However, I do think you do want either a permafrost or holdover on this. Running this just like this baseline, it's okay. Sometimes you'll get it when you need it, sometimes you won't. But you do need one of those upgrades on this for it to be really good. Next up, we got Lady of the House. So Lady of the House is a 1 mana capacity burnout 3 unit with very, very large stats. And that's what we have going on here. She's very good for stabilizing in the early stage of the fight. Sometimes I like to put multi-strike on her, but generally I'll have better units be putting the multi-strike on than the Lady of the House, and I'll just be looking to put Wickstones on her instead. This isn't the type of unit I'm going to be really banking on in a reform-based strategy, or sometimes even a burnout extension strategy. Usually when I take the Lady of the House, I'm just using her to stabilize myself in the early stages of the fight, tank damage for some backline dudes while I get my game plan set up, and then if she burns out, so be it. If I have a way to save her, that's great, but usually I'm not banking on her in the first place. She can do some solid damage if you put multi-strike and an attack upgrade on her, so that's nice. Overall, she's a really solid unit. You don't need a way to get around the burnout, but it does help. It is very nice if you can extend the burnout timer somehow. but usually it's fine just to use a Lady of the House as a way to soak up some damage, to get a little bit of damage in on those super tanky frontline dudes in the early game, and that's perfectly fine. Next up, we got Lady of the Reformed. So, Lady of the Reformed is kind of her own game plan. It's one of the things that, like, when you pick Lady of the Reformed, you're gonna be planning to build a whole floor around her. You pick the lady, and then you stick stuff behind her, obviously. And that's great because, unlike these stinkers, you only have to play the lady one time, and she gives you sufficient burnout time, or most of the time. Sometimes you will have a little bit of an issue with it if you mess up, so you have to be very careful with her. But most of the time, she's going to give enough burnout to your units that the burnout timers won't matter anymore. And that's great. She's overall one of the stronger units, I think, for melting. I think if you're going to be going for a burnout extension strategy rather than a reform strategy for something like Burn Bright Rector, you definitely want the lady. You don't want these losers. The lady's way better. The 1040 stat line is solid. This is a pretty beefy stat line for HP, so that's nice. In fact, it is, I think, one of the highest in the game, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. It's not as much as Demon Fiend. It's more than Guardian. It's not as much as Shadow Eater. Yeah, the Lady of the Reformed has a ton of HP, and that's very good. So you're looking to use this as a solid, permanent tank for the whole fight. And this is going to be your main way of getting around the burnout on stuff like your Rector Flicker or your drafts or whatever. And that's one way to approach burnout. I think it's one of the more solid ones. It's one of the more consistent ones. It doesn't suffer from a lot of the same problems as a lot of the other cards. But she does suffer from one major issue, and that is you only want her in very specific decks. And if you're not already going down that path when you're offered the later reform, she just doesn't really do anything. But besides that, she's pretty alright. Next up, we got Paraffin Enforcer. So, Paraffin Enforcer, he's their 1 mana, 2 capacity dude, and this one's a 15/15. This one does not have Burnout, and he has Strike. Friendly Burnout units gain Rage too. I've not won with this card. I've tried many times to win with this card. I've tried Quick, I've tried Multi-Strike, I've just tried boosting his stats. But he's never good enough. You know why? Because he takes up 2 slots. And that means that you need... Okay, let me explain it this way. When you're playing Rage 2 to your Burnout units, that means that you're planning on keeping them around for a while, right? Planning on keeping those Burnout units alive for quite some time. So, because you're applying to all the Burnout units on the floor, that means you want a lot of Burnout units. But you're planning on keeping your Burnout dudes alive for a while, right? That means you gotta put something in front of them to tank damage for them, or use Engulfed in Smoke. This is probably superior to... It's probably what you want to be using with this kind of strategy, but you won't always get these together. Anyway, and even then you won't always find holdover for your Engulfed in Smoke. But anyway, without Engulfed in Smoke, the problem is that you're going to want a tanky dude in front of your Burnout dudes to keep them alive while you're stacking up their Rage. But that means that you're going to have less space to put burnout units down. Because a Paraffin Enforcer's already taking up 2 spaces. If we put, like, Lady of the Reformed on the same floor, now we're taking up 4 spaces. That's already almost at capacity. We'll have presumably 1 space left most of the time before we take capacity. So we're getting like 1 draft, and that's our damage plan with the Paraffin Enforcer, because the Paraffin Enforcer doesn't do great damage by himself. He doesn't do anything. Really, he's just here for this rage effect. You can stick him in like a Hellhorn deck, but that doesn't really help a ton because Hellhorn just has way better units than this. Like, the base stats are okay, but the game plan with this guy just doesn't. The pieces just don't mesh together right. Like, the pieces are all here, but they don't fit. You can't fit all the pieces on the same floor. It just doesn't work. You need way too much investment just to make your Paraffin Enforcer work, and it's not worth it. There's way better things you can be doing than this. Next up, we got Paraffin Thug. Oh boy, I guess it's time. It's time to talk about the money problem. Okay, so Paraffin Thug is a 1 mana, 2 capacity, 23, and when he slays a dude, you get 20 coins. Let's go back and look at Horned Warrior. Horned Warrior is a 1 mana, 2 capacity, 34 with no ability. In the context of a fight, Horned Warrior is exactly the same unit as Paraffin Thug, except he has 10 more attack, which is a huge amount. So we're cutting down our stats in order to get this slay trigger, right? But, and here's the big problem. This is a really big but. You know what we're going to be spending this gold on? We're going to be spending it to upgrade our units, presumably, and some of our stuff. But guess what we've just put in the deck? We just put Paraffin Thug in the deck. So we're spending this gold to upgrade our Paraffin Thug, but we could just took more stats on it in the first place, and now it has less upgrade slots because we had to get it just up to par with the Horned Warrior in the first place, and it's never going to be as good. Additionally, you have to jump through hoops to get this slay trigger going. Sometimes you just won't get there. It's like the Reaper Hornbreaker Prince, but way worse because this guy has even less attack, and he doesn't get upgrades that increase his attack over the course of the game unless you buy them for him, presumably using the money that you've maybe gotten off of him. But there, to summarize, really, there's 2 big problems with this. One, we're sacrificing our potency in the fight to presumably increase our potential later in the run. However, we could have just increased our potential in the first place, and we would still have that increased potential later in the run, but we would also be stronger right now, meaning we're less likely to die to the boss, or whatever we have to deal with. Second, we have all this money now, but our units are terrible. So, the thing with unit upgrades is how good the unit upgrades are is proportional to how good the unit was in the first place. Sticking like a multi-strike on a Animus of Speed is way better than sticking it on something like I don't know, a Paraffin Thug, apparently. That's the example we're going with. But yeah, we've gimped our base stats, so now the gold that we are getting here isn't is even less effective because the base stats are no good in the first place. So we're putting upgrades on him, but the upgrades aren't even getting him to the same level that other units without this gimmick are in the first place. And he's never going to have as much potential. So we're getting this extra gold, but the stuff that we're spending the gold on is less good because we went for the option of getting the extra gold. It just doesn't make sense. This car is bad. Well, it's not the worst thing ever. I guess it does 20 damage, so that's something. It's one of your better backline units. I mean, look at Paraffin Enforcer over here. Fucking Paraffin Enforcer, Jesus Christ. Yeah, when we put him next to Paraffin Enforcer, he's pretty dang good. Because that 5 attack is quite a bit better, but he only has 3 HP, so he dies to everything under the sun. So yeah, unfortunately Paraffin Thug is, in my opinion, quite a bit worse than Horned Warrior, who is, in my opinion, just a mediocre Hellhorn card. So that's not good. Next up we got Remnant Host. So Remnant Host, it's a complex card. I'm going to note that the drafts you get off this cannot be reformed by any means. They're not cards in your deck, so they don't go to your consume pile, so you can't reform them. So what are we doing with Remnant Host? There's a few things we can do with this. We can use this to get out harvest triggers, because it's essentially 3 units for the price of 1. It can tank damage as well. Those are 2 big things. It's very rare that you're going to be able to actually get damage off of the drafts. You need to set up just right so that the Remnant Host dies, but the drafts stay alive. You can do that through like a sacrifice mechanic or just setting the floor up just right, but it's kind of hard to pull off. This is an extinguished dude, so it does synergize with the Waxer Snuffer. So that's nice. That means you can get 4 dudes off this, but sometimes you just won't have the capacity for that. It is only 1 capacity on the base unit. I think it is a fair bit better than a lot of these other cards. These other miserable cards. But it's not the best. It, once again, I hate bringing this up so often, but it once again suffers from consistency problems. Because a lot of the time you're just going to have no control over when you're able to get this effect. It's fine though if you're running some harvest triggers, that can be okay. But we're going to get to harvest triggers in a sec, and oh boy. Oh boy. Alright, next up we got resin removal. 1 mana, you remove all debuff effects from friendly units and all buff effects from enemy units. Okay. I got a problem with this card. You know what that problem is? This does jack against Pyre Wings. Literally nothing. Because there's no frame where you can play this against them. And that, like, the card's not that good in the first place. Why can't we just use it against the Pyre Wings? Please. Please rework this so that it's useful against the Pyre Wings. I might consider playing with it more then. But anyway, this is yet another card that we're mostly just looking to use in 2-card combos. You're going to want Permafrost on this, not because there's going to be major debuffs for most of the run, actually, that the enemies are going to be applying to your dudes that you're going to want to get rid of with this, but because we want to be using this combo with other specific cards. You know what those other specific cards are? Well, there's only one of them. It is Furnace Tap. You combo this with Furnace Tap to get rid of the Ember Drain on your guys after you've blighted to them. Uh, there's not a ton else you can do with this. You can use it to remove buffs from enemies as well. That's going to be stuff like Spikes and Rage. That can be really nice during the spell fights. You can use it for utility in that regard. It's really nice against some of the challenges, specifically the Spikes ones for obvious reasons. But besides Spikes and Rage, there's nothing really that major in terms of buffs that enemies get. So I'm not sure what else you'd be using this for. It removes damage shield, but the only dudes that, to my knowledge, that get damage shield are the ones on the first two stages, and they only get on Slay. If this could remove armor from enemy units, that would be a godsend. Like, that would be so much better. Actually, now that I think about it, that would make this card really good. Please make this remove armor. It would make the card not suck. Next up, we got Votivary. This is another one I've not golded, and it's one I've been thinking about a lot. So I've been thinking a ton about. I think it's no secret that this card isn't very good, but I don't think a lot of people understand why this card's bad. So first off, I'm going to get to the obvious, the mechanics of the card. It's a 1 mana, 1/1, takes up 1 slot, and it's a token unit. It has Endless. It has Extinguish, draw 1. So what does this card do? Well, it's not getting you through your deck faster because the draw 1 from the Extinguish is just drawing the Votivary back. So what Votivary does is he's an endless dude who has the specific upside of when he dies, you don't actually have to dedicate a card draw from your next hand to draw the Votivary itself, because it draws itself back off its own Extinguish trigger, if that makes sense. So the big factors with this are, do we care to draw it in the first place? Do we care to invest mana into it? And do we care to invest space into it? And that all comes down to the stats, right? This unit is meant to be used as a stat stick that you stick upgrades onto and then use it for whatever you're using those upgrades for. Now, assuming we're not overstacking upgrades on this, there are only 2 upgrade slots on it, so what are we doing? Are we using it as a frontline dude? We can give it 50 HP if we're lucky, or we can put a large stone on it, but that doesn't make a ton of sense because then we're not getting as much use out of the endless trigger because it's not going to be dying as often. At that point, we may as well just use something that doesn't have endless and has better base stats as a form of damage mitigation. We're not using this to mitigate damage by itself with no upgrades, because then we're going to have to pay the mana to put it back down every turn, and that's a huge strain on your resources for this. So that means we must be using this to do damage. Well, baseline, he only has 1 damage, so the best you're going to do is 2 attack stones. Just going to get him up to 21 damage, which is just slightly more than a Paraffin Thug. But you've invested all this money and all these upgrades into it, and you just have this mediocre damage unit. So, what do we use this card for? There's one thing we use this card for. We give it to to the clergyman that shows up in the one event so that he can put an upgrade on it. And we hope that we get lucky. That's it. It's literally it. Because you can get an extinguish trigger. It does like 40 damage off that dude. And that's the one combo I think Votivary's good with. If you can get that, then I feel like the card's worth playing. But the problem is that we would actually have to pick Votavary in the first place with no guarantee that we're even going to get that event. And even if we do get that event, there's no guarantee that he's going to give it the right upgrade. He can do something stupid and terrible with it, and then it's going to be terrible anyway. So I don't recommend Votavary. It's the card just doesn't make sense. Way too much emphasis is being put on this endless. I feel like maybe if the stats were a bit better, it would be worth considering, but as is, this just doesn't cut it. It kind of suffers from the same issue as the Edge Prior and the Wildwood Custodian over here. They just don't have good base stats. The base stats aren't doing anything, and the effect isn't impactful enough to justify these terrible base stats. I'm gonna move on from Votavary now. It's another disappointing card. Next up, we got the Wickless Baron. He has Harvest, gain, +1 attack, and 3 health. This card's almost good. He's almost good, but he's just not quite there. If this were +2/+2 instead of +1/+3, the card would be very solid. But it's +1/+3. So what does that mean? That means that we're supposed to use him to tank, I guess. So we're using this dude to tank, but he's just not quite tanky enough for it to make a ton of sense. Like, you just need a bit too much stuff to be dying every turn for this to be good. But a Lizardman, what if you use morsels with him, right? Like, feed him morsels to get the harvest triggers. Well, why don't you just feed your morsels to a gorge unit? That's way better than this thing. Like, imagine if this said gorge, gain +1 attack and 3 health. That would be terrible. So that's not a solid game plan. And if we're dedicating space to using morsels with this guy, that means that we're not using that space to kill enemy units, so we're not getting those harvest triggers. So we've essentially set ourselves back to square one. Now we just got this Wickless Baron saying here, eating up morsels, eating up resources to gain the same effects he would have gained anyway had we just done something that wasn't morsels behind the Wickless Baron. So let's assume we're not doing morsels with him. Morsels don't make sense. Not with this guy. So if we're not doing morsels with him, that means that we're planning on killing as many enemies on the floor with the Wickless Baron as possible. So, how many enemies do we have to kill for this to be good? Well, the attack scaling is not nearly good enough for that to ever become relevant, so we're not putting offensive upgrades on this guy. The health up, the health up is the relevant part. Assuming he's taking 15 damage on average per turn, we would need to have 5 dudes dying every turn to keep up. And even more for him to scale into the boss. 15 damage a turn on some fights is being generous. So he's not great at tanking. He's not quite good enough at backlining damage. Yeah, you can put your drags on the floor with him, but that's not helping a ton. It's just a slight stat boost. It's not going to keep up with the other stuff. Next up, we got the Wickless Wickless Tycoon. The other harvest dude at this rarity. This one has a bigger butt. He's a 320 instead of a 515, and he has Harvest gain 5 money. Oh god. Here we go again with the money. So instead of getting a unit that has actual good stats and does good things in the fight, we're playing this thing, and this one's kind of like the opposite of the Parent than Thug, where we want to stick damage upgrades on Thug, we want to stick tank upgrades on this thing, but the base stats suck. So we have this mediocre tank, and because we have this mediocre tank, I guess we're probably not sticking a backline behind him, like a legitimate backline, because why would I want to trust this dude to tank for my backline? Like, screw that. This dude's just not, he's not that beefy. He can't take a big beating, unlike some of the more traditional tanks from other factions. So what does that mean? Oh no. Oh no. What's that? What's that? Yeah, that's right. We're back to the freaking morsel game plan. So this is a way to turn your morsels into gold. That means that we're investing all these resources during the fight to get gold to spend after the fight to improve our deck, but we could have just picked good cards in the first place so that we could start at the point where we're trying to get our deck 2 with this extra gold. And if you're already playing Melting Umbra and this dude is your game plan, like if this is what you're trying to do, it's just not gonna work. Because you're just gonna die before the gold matters. Because at this point, not only are you investing your morsels into this guy instead of something that's actually going to help you win the fight, but the dude does no damage. You can't stick him behind the gorge dude because he takes up too much space. So what are you doing with him? What's the point of this card? I understand the idea, but it just doesn't work. It's cool on paper, but in practice it's just awful. It is just terrible to try to use this. It doesn't get you anywhere. Anyway, enough of that. Let's move on to Fatal Melting. This is one of like 2 AoE cards you have access to. It deals damage to enemy units equal to 3 times the number of friendly units that died this battle. So here we have more synergy with the Umbra. This is actually good synergy though, because we don't have to feed our morsels to one of these losers. However, this card costs 2. I wish it didn't cost 2, but I understand why it costs 2. This is really one of the better AoE strategies available to Melting, but given the other AoE strategy we have access to, that's not saying a ton. Card's alright. It has light synergy with Umbra, has no synergy with anyone else. It has okay synergy inside the clan itself. It's just an okay card. I'm not upset when I have to play with a Fatal Melting, but it's not the most exciting card ever. I'll certainly take it over a lot of this crap, though. Next up, we got Subsuming Blade. 2 mana, it's piercing. I think it's one of 3 things that can pierce here, 2 being stings with the hardened casings and the horn break. So that's nice. And it's deal 5 damage, and it has slay, increase damage by 3 permanently. So this one's a scaling card. You want to get this as early as possible for obvious reasons. It does not consume, so if you can put like a holdover on this, you can use this after you've picked this up early in the run. It can do some really good work, and you can get scaling really nicely. I do think you want to stick a cost reduction on this. It is very good at dealing with steel wings and the like. It's very good at chunking big tanky dudes if you picked it up early enough and managed to get it going. It's okay at dealing with backline guys in the early game. That's going to be how you're scaling this in the first place. Overall, it's just a solid card, but I think if you're getting this like past floor 4, it's just not good enough anymore because at that point it'll be way too hard to get the proc to go off, and it's just going to go downhill from there. You need to get this early on, before Daedalus preferably. It's really good if you can get it then, but if you get it past that point, I wouldn't bother with this. Next up, we got Wicked Blaze. 2 mana. We reform a unit and enhance it with an additional +10. I'm going to compare this directly to Molded because they're essentially the same card. The only difference is this costs 1 more and gives +10 attack, so we're paying 1 pyre for the +10 attack. Okay, that's fine. That's pretty nice on drafts. It's pretty nice on some other cards. I mean, it's okay with drags. It's okay with this stuff. But overall, I think this is slightly worse than Molded, but not by much. It's definitely above average when it comes to melting Remnant cards. I do prefer the consistency of the cheaper mana cost on the Molded to the added damage of the Wicked Blaze, but Wicked Blaze is a solid card. Anything that lets you reform a unit of your choice is a good card. So I'll just leave it at that. Now we got Mortal Entrapment. 25 damage and apply daze to an R8 damage unit for 3 pyre. This card sucks. I'm just gonna say it, this card's terrible. So the problems here are just prolific. First off, it costs 3 pyre. Why does it cost 3 pyre? I don't know, just to make the card harder to use, I guess. 3 pyre for this effect. 25 damage and daze 2. 3 pyre is a whole turn. I don't want to pay 3 pyre for that. Like, even if it didn't have the stipulation, this would the card would be a lot better if it didn't have the stipulation. Like, I would at least take it sometimes then, but with the stipulation, like, come on. And it costs 3. The fact that we have both these problems on the same card just ends up making the card nearly useless. Why is that? Because it's so, what I'm trying to say is you'll have something like a torch, right? Or any spell that does damage. It'll be like, oh damn, what if I torch the dude first and then I moral entrapment him? No, 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 no. Stop right there. How are you gonna torch the dude and then moral entrapment him on the same turn? Especially if you want to do something else. Like, God forbid you want to do something else that turn. You have to stick cost reduction upgrades on the moral entrapments because you're not putting them on torch, that's for sure. So now you're investing upgrades into this terrible card just so that you can have something slightly less mediocre. Card's not very good. There's way too many stipulations. It costs too much. It doesn't do enough for all the hoops you have to jump through to get this thing going. It's okay against bosses, but once again, you need to damage the boss a bit before they get to your main floor for this to do anything. And even then, daze 2 against some of the late game bosses for 3 mana isn't as impactful as what you can be doing with other cards that have less hoops that you need to jump through. Enough about that. Let's move on to the rares. Oh god. We're almost done. I'm sorry if my tone's been kind of negative throughout this video, but like I just I just have a lot of beef with the melting remnants. Alright, first up we got Wax and Spike. It consumes and enhances friendly units with plus 3x attack and applies burnout 1 to them on the floor. Okay, this card's got problems. This card's got major problems. First off, we're looking to apply the attack to our burnout units, but you need a lot of burnout units on the floor for this to be good, and they're burnout units. You are giving them a little bit of burnout, which is nice, and the card does have that going for it. This is a way to extend burnout timers, but then we're suffering from all the same problems as these stinkers again. So that's not good. Then plus 3x attack. I mean, it's a little bit. It's not the most impressive thing ever. It'll definitely help. But you're putting it on burnout dudes, which have a very real risk of dying very soon. So you're not going to have this for most of the fight a lot of time. It's okay with Lady to Reformed, I'll give it that. But the big, glaring problem with this card is it applies Burnout 1 to non-burnout units on the floor. And guess what? Guess what? It takes all your mana. So if you have a non-burnout dude just chilling on the floor with all your burnout units and you want to use Wax and Spike, that dude is probably screwed. Unless you have the Lady Reformed ready to go on that floor, that unit is gone. Because you're going to apply burnout to it, and now you're out of mana, so you probably don't. Well, most of the ways to remove burnout or extend burnout are free, but then you're stacking multiples of this kind of card in your deck, and that's not what you want to be doing. So you have to use this on a floor with only burnout units, and the burnout units have to be relevant through the duration of the fight. AKA, this card is only good with Lady to Reform based strategies. And you need to get the Lady first, and then you pick up the Wax and Spike, because you've already got the Lady, so you're not risking taking the Wax and Spike and then the Lady never shows up. It's no good with Reform because you lose the attack bonus when you Reform dudes from the Wax and Spike, so don't do that. Overall, like, it's just way too specific of a use case for this card to do anything. Stay away from it. I think this is definitely the worst Rail Spike by quite a bit. It's just a really, really disappointing card. Next up, we got Sacrificial Resurrection. So first off, I'm going to point out that you do need to hold on to one Pyre to actually play the draft, because the draft's not free. So this is kind of like a one-cost card. And this card allows you to do something really unique. It allows you to consume other cards in your hand. I'm going to talk about that before I get to the draft itself. Also, the draft is not a card in your deck. Keep that in mind. Like, that's a really big deal sometimes. So, Sacrificial Resurrection. It allows you to consume cards in your hand. That means that you can consume stuff like Deadweights, you can consume Blights of varying types, you can consume Scourges. It's really helpful in those kinds of fights. If you're going to be fighting Spell Devourer Seraph, I think this card is actually worthwhile, even though it may not seem like it at first, because you can use it to get those annoying Blightstones out of your deck, which is very nice. Because the Blightstones can just kill your run, can break your draw completely off those if you're unlucky. And being able to get them out of deck during the fight is a huge deal. So the draft. 99% of the time, the draft is just going to be a damage stick. You're almost never going to have a way to extend the burnout timer on him because you just consumed your hand. So you have no cards left in hand to actually play this. The only way to draft sticking around is once again with Lady of the Reformed. So if you're not using the Sacrificial Resurrection for the consumption effect and you're using it for the draft, then either A, keep in mind that you're only going to get one shot off the draft, or B, have Lady of the Reformed. I bring up the Lady of the Reformed a lot. That's because she's one of the better melting cards, and she helps kind of make these jank strats more solid in general. She's kind of like the glue for this faction in a way. So I think that's enough about Sacrificial Resurrection. Next up we got Wickless Recruitment. Okay. So the Wickless Recruitment, it removes burnout and debuff effects from a unit. I've played a lot of Melting Remnants, and not once, not a single time has the burnout removal been relevant. The only time this is ever useful is, once again, if I'm doing it with Furnace Tap. It seems like the burnout removal would be useful, but it just never gets there. Like, am I supposed to be using this as my primary strategy for getting around burnout? That doesn't make sense. It's a rare card, so why would I want to do that? Usually when this turns up, I've already figured out what I'm doing about burnout, so I don't need to remove burnout from dudes anymore. So the card shows up, and I'm like, okay, I can try to combo this with Furnace Tap if I'm running Umbra, but Furnace Tap is also rare, so I need to either take the Furnace Tap first and just never play it for the most part until I find Wickless Recruitment. Yeah, you can like stick Permafrost on and save it for bosses, but you know what Melting Remnant Umbra doesn't need help with? Bosses. They're very good at killing bosses. They're just terrible at everything else, so that's not the game plan. So I need to either take Furnace Tap first and hope I get Wickless Recruitment or Resin Removal. I need to take Wickless Recruitment first and hope I get Furnace Tap. Those are both bad situations that I don't want to put myself in. I thought this card was really cool at first, but after playing with it a lot, I am just utterly disappointed. I'm disappointed my day is ruined. Next up, we got Bounty Stalker. Bounty Stalker is once again one of the better Melting Remnant cards. It's a very solid backliner. It's one attack, 10. No, it's one pyre, 10 attack, 2 capacity, 5 health. It's got stealth 1, and when it dies, it gains plus 10 attack permanently. So, what are we doing with this? Well, for the most part, we're looking for ways to cheese the plus 10 attack. I talked about Intent on Death already, but you can just stick Endless on this dude and that'll work fine. In fact, it's probably preferable to Intent on Death. One moment. Okay, I just had to wet my throat there for a second. So, Bounty Stalker. He's got Stealth 1, which is actually really important on the card because you can stick this dude on his own floor, and since he has Stealth, it's kind of like Quick. Except it's not quite as good as Quick on this dude. Quick would be way better than Stealth on him, but beggars can't be choosers. So the Stealth, what's the Stealth do? It lets him hit a dude with his presumably huge attack and then get killed. So he hits a dude and then gets killed. He hits a dude and then gets killed. And every time he does this, he's getting more and more attack. You want to look for like multi-strike and endless on this dude. Do not mess around with Wickstone on him. Putting burnout on this is definitely not the game plan. What you want to be doing is in the early and mid game, trying to scale up attack on him, and then once you get to like the last two rings, you want to stick him behind someone who can soak up damage and just use him as a traditional backline unit that does a ton of damage. And that's a very good strategy. It's very good for killing Gilded Wings, which are a huge problem that I bring up all the time. Anything that helps you kill Gilded Wings is very good, and Bounty Stalker does that. Of course, the problem is you need to get this card fairly early. It's got the same problem as Overgorger, and it's actually very similar to Overgorger in the way it plays out. You spend the early and mid game stacking up damage. Then in the late game, you put this guy behind one of your other tankier guys so that he can do a serious number on the annoying frontliners. Alright, now we got the Devourer of Death. This is another one that I've tried so hard to make good, but I just can't. You know why? The problem is that he loses the soul stacks when he dies. So, what are we using him for? Are we using him for the boss? I sure hope not. We better have something going on for the boss. It's not the Devourer of Death. Or we're not using him for AoE clearing because every time, like, even if we reform him, he loses all the stacks, so we have to get stacks again somehow. And that can be tough sometimes. Like, it can be really tough to get stacks on this dude before he dies, because we want to put him in the front line so he can die. If we stick him in the back, what's he gonna do? He's just gonna get a ton of stacks, and then do a little bit of extra damage to the boss. That's not what we need. But for AoE clearing, if you set up right, he can AoE clear once. And then if you reform him, it's set up again, and setting it up is just a huge pain in the ass because just getting a single stack on this dude is a chore. But, well, okay, let me put it this way. It's easy to get a stack on this dude, but you have to put him in the back line for it to be easy. If you put him in the front line, most of the time he's going to die before he gets a stack because he's in front. So what's the solution? Oh, well, here's a solution. Lizardman. What if we use a spell to kill one of the backline dudes to get him to stack before he dies? I mean, okay, but then why do we need to Devourer Death if we just used our spells to kill the backline dudes? It makes no sense. The card's bad. The pieces are here, but once again, the pieces just don't fit together right. It's like I got all the parts of a good card here, but somewhere along the way, everything just went horribly wrong, and now we got this guy. Look at this guy. Does he look happy? He knows he's bad. Look at this face. This is not the face of a card that's having a good time. Alright. Anyway, let's move on to Remnant Pack. This is a utility card. What are we using Remnant Pack for? There's one thing that I think Remnant Pack's really good for. Most units, we can upgrade them with Endless. I think that's preferable to this because if we're trying to use this put on normal units, then we're just suffering from consistency problems. Yeah, again, we have to stick a card in our deck. units that we really want to be endless, we should just be putting endless on via upgrades when we get the opportunity. So what can't we upgrade? Ah, that's right, we can't upgrade our champion. Oh, I see. So what champions do we have access to? Well, Hornbreaker Prince. He's no good with this. You don't really get any. Usually, he's not in too much risk of dying because hopefully we're gonna have a little bit of armor from Brawler and a little bit of stuff from Reaper, and normally that's not that big of a problem. Additionally, if we put Endless on him with his Reaper form and we get him back, he loses all of his attack stacks, which really sucks. Wait, does he? It doesn't say enhance. Card does not say enhance. I could be wrong. If you know whether he retains the attack if you reform him or give him endless, please tell me in the comments. I'm actually very interested to know. I don't think it would actually. It would help you keep your Hornbreaker Prince alive in case of random BS that happens. That's a fair point. You don't want to use this for Wrathful because hopefully our Wrathful Hornbreaker Prince isn't dying in the first place, and he definitely loses all his rage. The Brawler Hornbreaker Prince probably doesn't need it because he's got armor to keep him nice and healthy. Sentient, you don't want to use this with the Sentients. I mean, like, maybe you can use it with Spikes, but that's not where you want to be. It's just not where you want to be. You're definitely not using it with Rejuvenate because you don't want to have. You want to be investing healing into this dude, so presumably he won't be dying. So maybe you can make it good with the Spikes. Let the Spikes dude die, but he has quite a bit of HP. So, actually, yeah, you can probably draw your tome before you have this dude die. And that's alright. I can see that working. Now, the really good one is here. This helps us make sure that nothing terrible screws our Tethys game plan. Specifically with Chillwind. Chillwind is a very fragile unit. It dies to all sorts of stuff. If you can give it endless, that would be spectacular because it gives it resilience for the entire fight. That's a godsend. One of the biggest hurdles with Chillwind Tethys is just keeping it alive. And the Melting Pact keeps it alive for the whole fight, essentially, once you draw it. These, it makes no sense with Glenn because we lose our stacks. It can make some sense with Monstrous because Monstrous can be on a floor pretty much by itself. So it can do damage, do damage, do damage, take damage, die, and then you can just play it again, and that's fine. With Architect, I feel like it's a little bit overkill because if our Architect penumbra is dying, then that means we're probably on the boss because we should presumably be putting him in the back. We could use this to cheese out even more capacity with the Architect penumbra by casting him over and over and over, but why? You can only put so many dudes on a floor. And with Burn Bright Rector, it's very good because it gets around the burnout issue entirely. In fact, it's very, very good with Burn Bright Rector. You just have to draw the card before he burns out, is the problem. And in general, it's very good with the aforementioned strategy of having a dude just follow the boss up the ranks. Just follow them up floors. Next up, we got Big Sledge. This card's terrible. It suffers from crippling capacity problems. So what do we do with Big Sledge? He's a damage unit, so we're not sticking him in front. If we put tank upgrades on him, the card makes no sense. It just won't do enough damage. Okay, so that means we must be sticking him in the back. Well, he takes up 3 capacity, so he's a huge pain in the ass to stick behind stuff. Alright, well, what if we use morsels with him? Well, that means we have to be feeding the morsels directly to the big sledge. And at that point, once again, why aren't we just using a gorge unit instead? A gorge unit like a crucible collector or whatever, really, like an alloy construct, gorge, penumbra, overgorge, all kinds of stuff is gonna do more work than feeding your morsels to big sludge. So the problem is he costs too much and he takes up too much space. It's just that simple. This effect is not worth the requirements. If he took up less space or cost less or his base stats were a bit better, then maybe he'd be worth considering. But as is, he just doesn't cut it. I've tried so many times to make this card good, but the card's just not good. Next up, we got Formless Child. So this is a weird one because it's kind of an alternative to Reform. Also, look at that face. Like, these cards are gross. These cards are disgusting. Anyway, this one has Extinguish, return a random defeated unit to your hand, enhance it with plus 40 attack. So this is not Reform. We're not giving more burnout to the dudes that we're getting back with this, and we're not playing against the dudes who didn't have burnout in the first place. However, this is random. This is random. So a lot of time you're just gonna whiff. You can get back like a drag or a training sword and be like, oh no, I just spent 2 mana to play this thing and jump through all these hoops, and all I get is this freaking drag who's just gonna do a little bit of extra damage and then die. Yes, yes, you did. Card's okay. It can help you pull off some gimmicky combos, but that's just it. It's a gimmick card. It's too inconsistent. It's got random in attacks. It's hard to pull off. You need to draw cards in the right order, and you need to have the Formless Child die at the right time. So it helps to have a way to kill the Formless Child yourself, but that's a huge pain. Putting him in front, if you want to put him in front, you need the stars to align. So you had the dude that you want to bring back die before you drew the Formless Child, and then you have to high roll to get that dude back. Overall, I think it is a little bit above average when it comes to Burning Remnant cards. I just don't like the card personally, but I know there's some really good stuff you can do with it. You can use this to bring back, I don't know, drafts. Are we bringing back drafts with this? Yes. Oh, yeah, I don't care for it, but if you want to do some silly combos with it, go for it. I just think it's a bit a bit of a gimmick. Now we got Legion of Wax. So back when I first unlocked Legion of Wax, I thought it was a really, really good card. Nowadays, I think it's just okay. This card is pretty much exclusively for killing bosses. It takes up a whole floor by itself, essentially. It's very good at killing bosses, but once again, Melting has a lot of good ways to kill bosses, so takes up a whole floor by itself. You have to put very specific upgrades on this. You want specifically a large stone and multi-strike on him. Without those upgrades, he's just kind of mediocre. So now we're spending 2 mana and an entire floor to give us insurance against the boss. That's okay. If you are very concerned about the boss, then this is a worthwhile pickup. If you're not concerned about the boss, this is a waste of time and resources because it's not going to help you at all with AoE. It's not going to help you at all. It's and help you barely against the tanks. That's pretty much all I got to say about the card. It's 2 pyre and a whole floor to ensure you against the boss. Assuming you get good upgrades on it. If you don't get the right upgrades, the card doesn't do enough. And finally, oh, I should also bring up that the enhance, it's only stuff that says enhance on the card. Stuff like, let's see here, stuff like enhancing you with +10, or razor sharp edge, or steel enhancer. Those kinds of cards. It does not work with spikes or multi-strike range, that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's move on to Memento Mori. 3 mana, we deal damage to the front enemy unit equal to 10 times the number of friendly unit deaths this battle. Okay, I do like this card quite a bit. It's another synergy piece between Umbra and Melting, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is probably the best reason to pick that combo. Unfortunately, it is rare. You're not going to see it all the time. And this card's good because it helps us deal with the Gilded Wings. The only issue with it is the mana cost and the fact that it has to set up. We have to put setup into this. We gotta get our morsels going. We gotta get our dregs dying. All that fun stuff. And then the card's good. This doesn't help us at all in the early stages of the fight when we really, really need to get something going. And that is a pretty big knock for the card, actually. It's actually not nearly as good as cards like Militable Crystallis for this very reason, because I want these types of cards to be reliable. I need damage in the early stages of the fight to the front line bad later on in the run. This doesn't give me that. This gives me a way to deal with Gilded Wings and the like towards the end of a fight. I'll take it. I'll take anything that's going to help me with Gilded Wings in a significant way, so the card's good in that regard. Unfortunately, it's not as good as it could be given the scaling nature of it. So that's all the Melting Remnant cards. Melting Remnant, thematically, they're definitely my favorite. But mechanically, they can just be miserable sometimes. They were definitely the biggest roadblock to getting a Covenant 25 win with every clan pair. And yeah, that's going to cover this review. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. And tell me about this interaction between Endless and the Hornbreaker birds, because this doesn't say enhance. I'd really like to know if you guys have any idea. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.